Welcome into the Hot Read Podcast live for Friday, September the 27th. I am your host, JT Ruhnke. You can follow me at JT_Ruhnke. Once again, on this Hot Read Happy Hour podcast for this Friday, joined, as always, by Stoney, Keeley, editor-in-chief at Sobros Network, 1/3 of Football and Other F Words podcast, and fellow writer over at Stacking the Inbox. Stoney, you are coming to us live from what seems to be like a cabin up in the Appalachian Mountains, it looks like. How did you find yourself there today, and how are you doing on this wonderful Friday?
Well, this is my mother's house. This is the house that I actually grew up in. There's no internet back home, no internet for 2 hours, and I'm starting to freak out about an hour before showtime, like, hey, is this going to be back up and running? So I text her. I say, hey, do you have internet at your house? She says, yeah. And I said, okay, I'm coming to just post up and just do a podcast in the middle of the dining room right here. So
Awesome.
Made it out here. No internet, no problem. The show goes on. This is, humble brag, podcast grind life. You do what you got to do to get the content out there. I'm hoping some of our viewers might enjoy some of the photos like this one of me on a mechanical horse in Gatlinburg waving a cowboy hat around. And then these on the other side that's a collage of all my yearbook photos from when I was
wonderful.
a child. So
well,
a lot of childhood memories in here, a special treat for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, we do love the background, and the change of scenery is always nice for the show. It's a good place to celebrate as well here on what we are on the precipice of a anniversary for the Tennessee Titans. Today is the 999th day since the Titans scored 30 or more points. We're so close to the anniversary, a big milestone for the Tennessee Titans. Of course, the last time that they were able to do so was on January 2nd, 2022. Coincidentally, against the Miami Dolphins, where they scored 34 points to the Miami Dolphins 3. It's a big day, Stoney, that I think we need to celebrate here on the show. And the conversation, I think, today is going to be talking about if tomorrow, Sunday, or I guess Monday. So it would be the 1,002nd day since they scored 30 points or more, that they can maybe finally stop the curse, I guess, if you will. But before we get into that, have to shout out our wonderful sponsors, Sinkers Beverages, and their sister store, Bluegrass Beverages. If you know 440, you know them. Hooked me up yesterday when I went out there and got a hat from them. They gave me this wonderful corduroy trucker hat to wear on the show. It really has not come off my head. As you know, we are a hashtag hats on podcast here on the 440 network. So had to represent them with that. But if you do not know Sinkers Beverages, we are happy to introduce you today. More on them later. Final thing of housekeeping before we kick off this show. If you are watching us live on Twitter or Facebook, do us a favor and head on over to the Broadway Sports Media or 440 Sports YouTube pages, where you can join the comment section, like Chef Ran, who says, Mama loves you, Stoney. Jake saying, Mama Stone goated. And then Richard commenting on the title of this episode, where it is this the last chance for the Titans to turn around their season? And Richard believes that there's 5 more chances to save the season for the Tennessee Titans as a correction. I think that's an interesting one. Of course, if you win all your division games, you always have a chance there. But I think we can start to talk about this Titans team going up against the Miami Dolphins on Monday Night Football, part of their one and only primetime game this season. Coincidentally, it is also a double feature Monday Night Football game, just like they had last year when they played the Miami Dolphins. They decided that the Titans needed at least one game this year as part of prime time, and they go back to the classic that ended up being last year. I don't know if you remember, Stoney, but the Titans coming into that game where the Miami Dolphins were being deemed the greatest show on surf, came into that game as a 10-point underdog against Tua and the Miami Dolphins. This week, they come in a little bit differently as a 1-point underdog. So the times have changed, but when you look at this game, it really, to me, feels like it's the week that if they were going to rebound and give fans and the media like any sliver of hope that this season can be anything more than top 5 draft talk before November, it's this week against the Dolphins. You know, you come into a matchup where it, much like last week, is a favorable one on paper, right? You don't are not going up against Tua and the Dolphins, you know, best ran version of their offense, and instead you're going up against either some combination of Skylar Thompson, who continues to be questionable for this game, or their new quarterback Snoop Huntley,
Pro Bowler Snoop
Huntley, correct.
Yes.
Not Snoop Connor, though. If you heard on the from the media availability yesterday, Easton Freeze saying that it was Snoop Connor, and so it is Snoop Huntley, and he comes over from the Baltimore Ravens, and he has every bit of chance to play this week, as does Skylar Thompson, but they will be going up against one of them. But like we said last week, it is an advantageous matchup for this Titans D that was once ranked first in the NFL in terms of defensive efficiency. But I think what we've learned over the last 3 weeks is that clearly something is not working with this team. And that comes down to the coaching. It comes down to the players' preparation and how they're attacking their preparation in terms of leading up to a game. And I think it's something that Brian Callahan had to answer to this week for sure. Here's what he had to say earlier this week on accountability, not just for the players, but the coaching staff as well.
We hold accountable every day. I mean, that's our job, to be able to correct and coach and teach. And then, again, we're trying not to repeat mistakes. And look, I think our guys hold each other accountable. I don't see that as an issue. And sometimes when you're losing games the way we've lost, you know, those are just things that come up, and there's got to be something that has to be different, and that's ultimately starts with me, and whatever that looks like, whether it's accountability, whether it's coaching, whether it's position coaches, whatever it is, it's something that we got to find some answers to, because it's not going the way we thought.
And find answers quick. They have to, because like I said, this is the game where if you're going to turn your season around, things have to be different and things must change. So Stoney, I think the question that I first asked to you here is that if you were in that locker room and if you were one of these position coaches, what is something from this team that you've noticed over the first 3 weeks that you think absolutely has to change this week?
Well, for one, it doesn't feel like there's been an effective counterpunch. We've seen this offense on script look pretty good. We've seen the defense look pretty good early on in games, and when teams adjust, I don't feel like the Titans have necessarily met their opponent in the ring there. And you know, I know there are growing pains with this. It takes some time for these things to gel, but it's the results dropping this team to 0-3. You just wonder, blow after blow after blow, how many blows can this locker room take before you start getting the guys that are making business decisions? You start getting the guys whose effort is starting to drop a little bit. I think you have seen a lack of productivity from people that you need to be productive for the whole system to go. And there's been no proof of concept that what they're preaching is going to work. So I think every week that goes by when you're not obtaining that proof of concept, I think it stresses the locker room a little bit. And so that's why I land on this being a must-win game, because you have the bye week. You get a chance to kind of regroup. I don't love that it's early in the season, but at this point, it kind of feels like this is a team that maybe went out there on ice skates and they've never put on a pair of ice skates before. And so they're slipping, sliding around all over the ice. They got to take a moment to gather themselves and get their balance and kind of hit reset and start over. I think if you get a win on Monday night, this team is going to have some confidence moving forward as they get to regroup. And then you get the week off and you come back against the Colts team that I think they should beat as well. They have a lot of the edge in that matchup as well. And suddenly you're looking at 2-3. If they can win the next 2 games and maybe things start clicking and you get back into it. But I don't know that that happens if this team drops to 0-4 and then they have to sit and stew and let the 0-4 start fester over the course of the bye week. So I think it's a big chemistry game. You've got to get the chemistry there. You've got to get out there. The effort has to be high. They're going to have to tackle well in this game. They're going to have to execute, and they're going to have to finish. This is a game that they've absolutely got to win.
Yeah, I think you bring up an interesting metaphor there about ice skates. I think it feels kind of like what this team is on, trying to find their balance and trying to, for the brain to the legs to click and how you're supposed to move on that ice. It feels like this game, with the limitations that the Miami Dolphins should have this week against this Titans defense, feels like it's almost the game where you're on the ice skates and you're holding on to the boards and you're just walking. You're just trying to walk / skate around the outside of the rink here. As somebody who sucks at ice skating,
I've never worn a pair in my life.
I've worn a pair maybe 2 or 3 times. And the last time I went, it really felt like I had no idea what I was doing. And I kind of just held on to the rail the entire time. This feels like that moment where it's like you now have a lot of things going for you. And you had a game plan last week against the Green Bay Packers and just simply didn't execute. And it feels like when we'll touch on this a little bit later, you're going up against a Miami Dolphins team who kind of is built in the similar style and how they kind of play their offense and how they want to play their game. And so it feels like this week, if you execute that similar game plan, it almost feels like that is, the confidence booster that you might need. And so I do think you also bring up something which I wrote about on Stacking the Inbox yesterday about how long it might take this team to click and almost the growing pains that maybe we should have expected from this team. Obviously, you look at the offensive line, having some new pieces, Lloyd Cushenberry being the general of that offensive line. J.C. Latham, rookie, Peter Skoronski getting back into the rhythm of things. That is a group that I think, for better or for worse, mainly for worse, has played individually instead of together. That's something I think that I've noticed a lot, how much this offensive line is not really working as a unit in terms of the pass protection, I think, for sure. You look at the offensive weapons that they have: Alvin Ridley, Tyler Boyd, Tony Pollard, all guys who this week, have kind of expressed how that chemistry just isn't there yet for this team. And when you really talk about all these different things, I think it comes down to the coaching staff that needs to kind of accelerate some of these things for these players. The coach, it's on the coaches really to scheme up things and coach and convey the game plan to put these players in a position for them to have that chemistry. And I think Nick Holtz yesterday, when we asked him about the newness and the youth in this offense, and maybe if that's a sticking point as to why things aren't really working as well right now, gave a really interesting answer that I don't necessarily feel great about.
Oh no.
I won't talk about here. And I want to just play this clip here and get your thoughts, because I do think it's an interesting answer. And so here is Nick Holtz on the newness of your offense.
Absolutely, it's affecting it. You look around, you kind of go through the games and you're like, man, we're playing really well at times. And then it's one thing here that's come up, one thing here that comes up. And it's kind of, especially with young players that haven't seen it before, you're like, oh, all right, well, we've hit that once, we've hit this 2 or 3 times this week, but maybe it didn't sink in, or maybe, boy, we didn't explain it well enough. So I think especially as a coaching staff and as players, we're all kind of learning together, I would say, which has been good. And I mean, good and bad, right? You wish you'd be learning more after wins and successful plays, and hey, if they do this the next time, be ready for this. But we're kind of all in that realm together, it feels like.
So the answer there, I think, for sure, that I think is really interesting as I fumble the bag with trying to redo this here. His answer there with kind of things sometimes work, but then the other times you miss them. And Nick Holtz pointing out that sink in with this Titans team, or maybe we didn't convey it, and that we're kind of learning together in this new season with a lot of people really just kind of set off some red flags for me. And I'd be interested to see if you agree with me in that portion, because it feels like you had all offseason to really settle into this scheme. And it's something that Tyler Boyd talked about earlier this week, that as in, he's the one who's played in this offense and he's seeing other players not really click with it so far. It almost makes me question how effective the coaching has been for this offense, to where we're still getting answers 3 weeks into the season about things not being conveyed right to some players, and players conveying those things on the field, how the coaches want them played out, and vice versa. And it makes me a little concerned about, this offensive group as a whole. I don't know if that makes any sense, Stoney, but that's kind of my feelings when I heard Nick Holtz talk about the newness of this offense yesterday.
Well, it's really interesting. It's something we've talked about all summer. It's kind of refreshing to hear coaches speak with such honesty here. I think this quote, this clip you showed kind of represents the disconnect that many of us had with projecting this team, not taking into account the wild card of, hey, can the coaches explain and teach this offense clearly enough for it to soak in? I think we all just assumed, well, it's an experienced coaching staff. You have some talent in the room. They're going to be good at it. Like, that's the whole thing with Brian Callahan in Cincinnati. He was the teacher of the offense. And now Nick Holtz, the teacher of the offense here in Tennessee. I think the thing that a lot of us discounted was just how big the learning curve was going to be for them and getting adjusted to the new personnel that they have to work with. And I think this applies not just in football, but into any leadership position in general. You have to know how to speak to your people. And there is a critical skill in that, and recognizing when someone might not be understanding what you're putting down. And so you're seeing the evidence of that happening in real time, where, hey, we're doing it this way, but it's not sinking in with this person. They're not getting it. They're not carrying it onto the field. And so I think that's where, as a coach, as a leader, I should say, in this example, you have to be able to adapt and take a step back and say, okay, well, how can we fit this in a different way that maybe this person understands better? And that is the teaching aspect of coaching that I think you only get through the live reps, which is what we're seeing right now. As guys continue to get to know one another, as guys struggle, they face adversity, you see how a player responds to that. You coach to that. You meet them in the middle somewhere, and that's how you effectively solve this problem. And when I look at it, like a lot of other leadership issues, it just takes time. And that's where I come back to, it's just going to take some time for everything to click. There's still reason to be optimistic. Nick Holtz is right. When you see flashes of this offense working to its full capabilities, to its full vision and potential, it looks really good. And it's exciting in those moments. Titans fans should be excited to see that kind of offense. But then there are other instances where it just looks like the whole thing's just discombobulated from top to bottom. And you're wondering, how the hell is this even functioning right now at all? How are the Titans even in this game with this kind of play? So I think it's just there's a period of adjustment to the personalities that you're working with, and trying to figure out how best you can help them too, that we're seeing the Titans coaches go through in real time.
Yeah, and Kenneth in the comments here says there's a reason off-season champs are rarely successful in year one. And if whether or not the Titans were truly the off-season champs does make sense to what you're saying. Bringing in a lot of these guys from so many different systems and trying to make it work early is something that is definitely a challenge. And Hurricane Lou, I think, brings the opposite side of that in terms of, with this professional football team, like, practicing patience only gets you so far, because then the frustration starts to build in for your team that looks so discombobulated. And I think that's something that is something we need to start seeing more and more of. And I see so many questions here in the comments about MPF. We are going to get MPF in terms of game plan later in this show. And once again, just a reminder, if you are joining us live on Twitter or Facebook, or here in the comments section, do us a favor, join us over on the YouTube channels, Broadway Sports Media or 440 Sports YouTube channel. And then also, if you're over there, hit like, hit subscribe. If you're on Twitter or Facebook, hit us with a like or a retweet. That does really, we really appreciate it. And it does so much more for us than just hitting a silly little button for you guys. Share the show with a friend if you want them to come in here and talk a little bit of Titans preparing for the Miami Dolphins this week. Stoney, I think on the opposite side of that spectrum here, on the defensive side of the ball, I think there is not as big of a problem there, but more so kind of just a matter of execution. And it's one that I think got overlooked because of, it was the Malik Willis game, and Malik Willis was able to absolutely dominate last week against this Titans team. But you get a sense that the pieces to stopping that team were there. It's just none of them were really executed correctly. And I think that's something Denard Wilson definitely brought up yesterday in his press availability about how many missed tackles the Titans had this past weekend against the Green Bay Packers. He cited 15 missed tackles for 118 yards, which is something I also noticed last week. I was saying I wouldn't be surprised. And our data analytics department for Fantasy Points, who I also work with closely, when they charted this game, it was something that, maybe it was one of the games with the most missed tackles they had ever seen. And I didn't get a straightforward answer, but 15 tackles for 118 yards, that's going to lose you a game every single time. And so when we asked Denard Wilson yesterday about his defensive game plan and how they executed last week, here's what he had to say on the matter.
They did an excellent job in the run game. I think that, this was the first week, the games we had this season where we didn't tackle well. And a lot of the plays that they had yak yards off of missed tackles. And if we tackle in space, we were in situations at third down where we could have got off the field. But, he used the whole field. They ran their offense in terms of their run game. They ran their offense very well. We just got to be better at what we do and control the things that we do and play better and play to our standard.
And so I think there is a frustration there with the defense, especially considering that the first 2 weeks you saw this Denard Wilson defense kind of at its peak almost, it running on all cylinders for this team. And Hurricane Lou in the comments here brings up an interesting question. How much is missed tackles a coaching thing versus a guy's thing? I think it really can't be put on either one. I think if it were up to me, I think it would lean the players, because it's the job of the defensive coordinator to make the play. Obviously, the player is the only one who can make that play. Denard Wilson can scheme up his guys only so much, but if Kenneth Murray or Ernest Jones or Jamal Adams can't hit that hole and secure the sack or the tackle for loss, which is something that happened numerous times on Sunday, you're going to get those moments where they're able to break 4 or 5 tackles on one play and get a huge advantage there. And so I think when you look at this week and upcoming, I think that if this Titans team is just able to execute a similar game plan to what they did last week, they're going to find so much more success in this matchup against the Dolphins.
So I think, to speak to the missed tackle thing, I am with you. I err on this is an issue with the players. I have largely, for the bulk of my career studying and writing about football, felt like maybe we know correlation does not imply causation, but I feel like there's a lot of low effort guys that also happen to be poor tacklers. And the best tacklers in the league are the guys that you see playing with their hair on fire. And this is where I can't help but wonder if the frustration is setting in on the defense. And think about it too. This is not a unit that has really gelled together either in terms of playing time. This is a massive overhaul on the defense this year. These guys are just getting to know each other. They're just getting to play together. This is not some veteran unit that has spent the last 5 years together. There's a lot of new faces here. And when your quarterback is throwing massive picks and the flick six and the fumbles and all the mistakes, and receivers are dropping balls and your right tackle can't stop anybody. I do wonder if maybe that does affect the defense in the form of frustration. And because of that, things kind of slip through the cracks a little bit. Maybe you're not tackling as hard because your heart's just not in it at the same rate that it was when the game early on in the game. I think there's also a potential situation where this defense wants to be hyper aggressive. And when you are hyper aggressive, the way that they were playing up to the line of scrimmage against the Packers, you're going to give up the middle of the field. If you vacate the middle of the field to rush your linebackers, then what we're going to see is Jaden Reed crossing over the middle and Malik Willis just dumping it right over your heads. And the next thing you know, it's a big gain. Also, if you're over pursuing on angles out of aggression to get into the backfield and they bounce that thing inside or into the opposite direction, well, suddenly you've pursued too far and you're out of position to make the tackle. So I do think that there is probably a little bit of gray area in here. I think maybe from a schematic standpoint, from a play calling standpoint, maybe you do dial the aggression back a little bit. But I do look at the players themselves and think like, man, you guys, you just got to step up. You've got to be a little more intense and a little more physical. You've got to put what the offense is doing aside, and you've just got to go out there and execute and play well. I feel like this matchup on Monday night is going to be a lot tougher than the one that they had last week, because you have guys like Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and Devon Achane, I can never remember,
Achane.
but even Jalen Wright is getting some action there, and they have some tough runners too. And Jeff Wilson, I don't know, I think he's battling an injury right now.
Well,
and Alec
real
Ingold,
quick,
the fullback.
I mean, yeah, we'll get into this, but this is probably the only time I'll have, since we're on that discussion. There's a really legit possibility that the Titans are going up against 5 guys from the backfield. Like if Raheem Mostert plays in this game, there's a real possibility that we see Mike McDaniel roll out a line where you see maybe 3 of Achane, Wilson, Wright, Mostert, and Ingold in the game at the same time, which is something when I watched the Dolphins game last week was absolutely crazy to see.
Yeah.
Just a quick aside, but like,
and by the way,
there's some crazy things in this game where you're going to see Achane lined up as the boundary receiver on one side. And like, you're going to see like Jeff Wilson Jr. right next to him. And I'm like, that's such an intriguing part of the matchup that I'm interested to see Denard Wilson and this defense try to counter against. Sorry, just a little ball knower aside thing that just piqued my interest there.
No, it's really interesting. We can nerd out about this because I love the run game that Mike McDaniel has crafted in Miami, and people tend to think about the explosive plays to Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, but everything that they do is predicated off of the run. And Mike McDaniel does some really creative things in the run game to churn yards. I do like Chef Rand did have my back in the comments there. Apparently LaFleur said he saw how aggressive our linebackers were against certain run looks, and that's how he set up that first play on Sunday. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Getting out coached.
Yeah, I think that's, something that is a way that the Titans simply just have to execute better. And I think Kenneth in the comments earlier to talking about that execution that the Titans need to practice a little bit more on Monday night is in the turnover battle. I think if you execute correctly on Monday night, you probably see yourself get a turnover or 2 and finally end the 12-quarter drought that this Titans team starts the year with no turnovers. And as he said, the number one thing for me has to be winning the turnover margin. And that's something, it comes down to both the Titans defense executing and getting those turnovers versus Will Levis not having those turnovers right there. We can get into more of the specifics of this game now, but before we get into that, have to give a wonderful shout out to our title sponsors, Sinkers Beverages, who have been serving the East Nashville community for 4 decades. They are a 3-time Best of Nashville Liquor Store of the Year. I had, I was able to get out there and see it in person yesterday, and I have to say their store and their lineup is absolutely impressive. I was blown away with how nice it was in there and the operation that they run. Also got my opportunity to join their in-crowd, their special members-only email list, where you get emailed your special benefits when they do exclusive allocations of certain things. Which, by the way, got a little birdie told me that if you're really looking for some of the good stuff, whether it be some special types of bourbons or anything that is pretty exclusive and hard to come by, it's coming up. So if you want to get in on that, you're going to have to join their in crowd sooner rather than later. And also, I know that there's going to be a lot of events coming up because I believe it's their 40th anniversary coming up next year. So there's going to be a lot of big things that they're doing, but you can only do that. You can only know about those things if, and also follow them on all their social medias at SinkersBev. But if you can't make it out there yourself, don't worry. They have you covered because you can search Sinkers on Uber Eats and have the booze delivered to your house. Remember, they drive so that you can drink very responsibly. Also have to give a shout out to Bluegrass Beverages in Hendersonville, who have been serving their local community for over 50 years. I believe their 50th anniversary was last year, right, Stoney? If I'm not mistaken there.
Yeah.
So if you are in that area, go and check them out because I know they do a lot of events out there as well. Special thank you to both those places, local businesses supporting local businesses. Also, special shout out for the wonderful hat once again, because it is a really good
fantastic
hat.
That's drippy, as the youngest.
Thank you, Stoney, for using. I was out there with Braden yesterday. Just a weird aside, but he introduced me to the guys over at Sinkers as his Gen Z correspondent. In terms of social media use and management. So I don't know whether to be flattered or take that as maybe a backhanded compliment, as you youngins don't know what's going on or whatnot. I don't know. But hey, it is drippy. And I do thank the Sinkers guys for the drip nonetheless.
I try to stay current because that's the quickest way to fall out of relevancy is to not connect to the younger audience. So I try to do my part. Do my best.
I do agree there, but we can get on with this, talking more about the game specifically on Monday night, and something that we kind of have already harped on here is you look at the things that Green Bay did last week, as Chef Rand pointed out in the comments earlier, and you could see that their game plan may be just a broken record of that, with the kind of personnel that they play with. In the way that the Miami wins, which is, with their guys using their speed and the yards after the catch and their elusiveness, and then also using their quick running backs to win on the outside. It's not a lot of ground and pound here. It's scheming up their guys to get them to the outside and then take off. And I think that's something that the Titans have very much struggled with for the first three games here. If there was a weakness in this Titans defense, it is on the outside. And if you're able to get the ball on the outside, you're going to beat this Titans defense. So, Stoney, I ask you, how do the Titans get the best of Miami this week? And I think one of the biggest keys for me this week is, I think personally, it's the Kenneth Murray nut up or shut up game. Personally, now that Ernest Jones has come in, I think it's been a good thing that we haven't seen as much Jack Gibbons, even though he's a solid role player. I think we both agree that he was never going to be that productive as one of these team starters. But for as much as Ernest has been good, Kenneth Murray has been, I think the ceiling for him right now is that he's been serviceable. And if you go back and look at that game last week, it was less than serviceable in week 3. There were a lot of times that these, small, unique, quick receivers that the Green Bay Packers had absolutely got the best of him. And I tweeted out, it didn't take me more than 5 seconds into watching the All-22 to find a clip of Kenneth Murray to kind of put out on Twitter about, hey, if the Packers were going to be able to do this against you, you better find a way to be able to defend against Jalen Waddle, Braxton Berrios, and Tyreek Hill. And it was the first play of the game where Kenneth Murray slides right into Ernest Jones, and Jalen Reed is just able to beat him immediately and get 5-6 yards of separation. And then he was taking the ball 30 yards down the field on the first play. So going back and looking at that, Kenneth Murray, I think, is one of the players that has to absolutely step up this week and prove some of the doubters wrong about his production. Because if Miami is able to get those one-on-one matchups this week with Kenneth Murray, and it's a Jalen Waddle or a Tyreek Hill, I think the Titans are really in trouble on that one.
Yeah, I mean, it could be deep water for the Titans in that scenario. I'm with you. I think this has to be a big game for the linebackers as a whole. And the play that you highlight there with the Jaden Reed crosser, it's a perfect example of what I was talking about with the tackling. Kenneth Murray runs into the wrong zone or responsibility. However you slice it up, he runs into Ernest Jones the fourth, and suddenly he's out of position, having to make that cut back to gain ground that he's lost to a speedster like Jaden Reed. It's just a disaster play, and he put himself in that situation. I think if the Titans are going to slow down this offense, both of those guys need to be really good, really disciplined. They need to fly to the edges, and they need to tackle before these players can get into space and can get going. Because if the whole Mike McDaniel offense feels like at its heart, it's predicated on spacing. It is predicated on getting guys in the open field where they can win one-on-one matchups and turn the ball up the field and just smash on the gas, just hit that accelerator and zoom like the Road Runner or something like that. So I think if you can disrupt that before they can get going, I just talked about connecting with a younger audience, and I'm dropping Looney Tunes references on the show. But if you can get to the,
so that's not old enough for me. So
all right, fair enough. I can still keep my Gen Z card then.
Yeah, my correspondent. I'll be your correspondent here as well. I'll
Thank
give you
you.
the thumbs up or down. I'll give you. Here's a Gen Z one. I'll give you a boom or a doom if it's hitting the right space here. And maybe I'm the only one on the show right now that understands what I just said. But
you are. I need to do better. I need to get back in the film room.
Sorry for getting you off topic. Continue.
If the Titans can't get to the point of the catch and disrupt the weapons that the Dolphins have on offense before they get going, it's going to be a long day. And subsequently, I can't sit here and say, well, vacate the middle of the field, get to the edges to make these tackles, because that got him in trouble last week by giving up the middle of the field. Now, we can have an interesting conversation about Skylar Thompson versus Malik Willis. If it's Snoop Huntley, I think Snoop Huntley's probably the best option there. Maybe a little bit different, but go ahead.
I was just going to say, I would say if Mike McDaniel does have the option between Snoop Huntley and Skylar Thompson, and he's watching back the film against this Titans team, I don't know how he does not go with Snoop Huntley this
Agreed.
week. Just the threat of him able to run as well and kind of be that game manager that, like Chef Rand says, like what got Kenneth Murray in trouble is that he bit super hard on the fake pitch that they did on that play. I think Snoop Huntley is probably able to kind of do those things and those play action things that are going to trick the defense a lot better than Skylar Thompson would in this game specifically. And then also, as Chef Rand also says, to your point there, eye discipline and tackling have to be better. And that's just essentially executing. And Denard Wilson this week, going back to the question of versus whose fault is it? Is it the defensive coordinator or the player? In terms of execution, Denard Wilson is going to have to scheme up these guys, especially in the middle of that defensive backfield, to be in the right position to succeed and execute, because that's really where it's going to be. Because as Awaken to the Eternal.com, goated Hall of Fame name in the Hot Read podcast chat here, says, I'm wondering if Jack Gibbons would add more stability to that defense along with Ernest Jones. We don't need everyone blitzing all the time. I think it's pick your poison on that. I think they're both. I mean, Jack Gibbons might be a tad better. That's giving him the benefit of the doubt there. Like
I'm picturing Jack Gibbons trying to run down Devon Achane in the flat, and I'm having nightmares.
Maybe I have to go back and watch that. I'd be interested to go back and watch the All-22 from last year and see how he held up against that team. That would be an interesting experiment before the game on Monday. But I mean, it's really on Denard Wilson to put these guys in the right spots, because outside, I think Ernest Jones can do it to an extent. I don't think he's the greatest at it or even top 10 in the league at it. But outside of that, Kenneth Murray, Jack Gibbons, it's really on Denard Wilson to put them in the right spot because they can't really do that themselves because of how inefficient they've been in coverage as well. Awaken also says we need good open field tackling, which has been a problem too. And also asks how much time has Huntley spent with Miami? He spent maybe as much, if or a little bit less time than Malik Willis spent with the Green Bay Packers system. So I don't think that could be a difference there either.
I would also say like that interview might have gone like, can you throw a swing pass? Can you pitch the ball? Can you throw a screen? Yes. Okay, cool. We're good.
Yes.
You can run this offense.
Yeah, I agree with you there on that one. And so being able to kind of figure out this Mike McDaniel defense early or offense early and be in positions to execute, I think is going to be the biggest thing once again, because like we saw last week, you get a guy like Emmanuel Wilson or a guy like Romeo Doubs out in space, he's going to force 5-6 missed tackles in this game. And when you have guys like Jamal Adams and Kenneth Murray who are not simply executing and they're not in the right spot to execute, you're going to have a problem there. And so with that, I don't know if you have any more thoughts on that before moving on.
Let me wrap up my thought. If you're going to have to give up the middle of the field to come to the edges to take these running backs, these wide receivers down on screens, pitches, all that sort of stuff, then I think it does become a big safety game for Amani Hooker and Quandre Diggs to come up and kind of protect the middle of the field. And
the Amani Hooker face game, if you will.
Yes.
What's going on this week?
So you've got to have your corners in coverage. Your safeties have to come up. If you're going to play Jamal Adams anymore as a sort of linebacker, flat defender, he's got to get to the play and make the tackle too. I think this is going to be, to Awaken to the Eternal.com's point, I think maybe you don't have to blitz every play on this one. Maybe we draw up a little more conservative of a game plan against this offense.
Yeah, I do agree. And Chef Fran also bringing up, you can never count out a Jonnu Smith revenge game because of course, right? I think they use him in very interesting ways, either as a slot receiver, as a tight end, or even as a fullback. He kind of plays that Chig role.
He does.
Except a little bit more to the extreme in this offense is what I've noticed. But I mean, he has been able to be effective for him. And I think you do bring up an interesting point there. Our good buddy, Zach Lyons, your fellow podcast co-host on the Football and Other F Words, brought up some interesting pressure statistics or blitz rates this morning, in which the Titans, through the first 3 weeks, this has been their blitz rates. In week 1, they blitzed at a rate of 36.4%, week 2, 27.3%, and then in week 3 against Malik Willis, 52% on that one. And then if you look at how those pressure dropback rates were against the quarterbacks in week 1, 27.3%, week 2, 15.2%, and then week 3, 28%. So they have not been efficient in blitzing the quarterback, in something which has been a big problem for a defense that we were emphasizing how much the blitz was going to matter in this Denard Wilson-led defense. And so I think that brings us to the other part of the defense, which is going to matter a whole heck of a lot this weekend, and it's setting the edge with Jeffrey Simmons, Harold Landry, and Arden Key. Those are 3 guys who must show up this week. I think there's been a lot of criticism, and I think fairly so, of Jeffrey Simmons this week, and what he's been able to do so far this season. Obviously, T'Vondre Sweat has not been. The dynamic duo has not been the world beaters we thought they could be early on. And that shows in some of the data and the rankings so far for Jeffrey Simmons. This is from Paul Kaharski's podcast yesterday, where he went and dug these things up. In terms of PFF, Jeffrey Simmons ranks as the 46th interior D lineman right now. Versus the run, he's the 110th. He's 11th versus the run. So he's been good against the run, like we thought. But when you look at the pass rush, 110th. in pass rush, 39 spots behind fellow Titan Sebastian Joseph Day, which I think are numbers that are absolutely unacceptable for your highest paid defensive tackle in the league. And even if you want to cite those kind of things in terms of the double team rate that he may be seeing versus, the double team rates against T'Vondre Sweat and things like that, you then have to ask yourself, okay, if Jeffrey Simmons is getting double teamed, that means the three other guys on the front of the line here should be getting, at least some good pressure here. And that just simply has not been the case. This is also from Zach earlier today, looking at the pass rush win rate for all these guys. If you look at Arden Key, he has a 11.3% win rate, which is good for 41st in the league. His productivity has been tied 70th in the league. Harold Landry is 71st in win rate, but 32nd in productivity. So he's had a little bit more success there. But then you look at T'Vondre Sweat, who has, when he's not getting when Jeffrey Simmons is getting double teamed, he really has not been double teamed at all. And, when you look at he's ranked 51st in win rate and tied 58th in productivity to go along with Jeffrey Simmons' 61st rank win rate and tied 55th ranked productivity. It's just, it's not enough for a team that, when you have your corners, you may be down now, Cheeto, who, spoiler alert, goes on IR today. So he will miss at least the next 4 games.
It's a rough loss.
When you have your secondary who's been playing pretty well, and you have those lockdown corners who have been kind of making it hard for teams to throw the ball efficiently for 95% of the game or so, you need your front line to step up, and they simply have just not been able to do it.
Yeah, and I would be curious if there's any sort of charting on this, because I don't, the dynamic on stacking the inbox. Zach is the numbers guy, and I just watch a lot of film. I feel like watching a lot of film on the Titans so far this season, it seems like I really noticed it in the Jets game and the Packers game, but it felt like offenses knew there's no threat from the edge. We can just put our tackles out there one-on-one, and they're going to generate push. They're going to win those matchups. So let's use the entire interior offensive line to just gum up T'Vondre Sweat and Jeffrey Simmons. And sometimes they got a little extra help in there. There were double teams on both of those guys. And if you think back to what we've talked about on the Hot Read podcast, even before we really saw what the defense would be, my idea of how it would function would be interior pressure, collapsing the pocket on the quarterback, blitzing, causing second guessing, and man coverage on the outside, holding up to force quarterbacks to make mistake. Well, the baseline of that is interior pressure. And if they don't get it with Jeffrey Simmons and T'Vondre Sweat, then if my theory is true, the exponential impact on the defense is that the whole thing is just kind of shut down. And that's kind of what we're seeing on the tape, is that the last 2 offenses that they've played, which again, listen, the interior offensive line of the Jets is probably going to end up being one of the best in football by the end of the season. Joe Tippmann, John Sampson, Elijah Vera Tucker, all very, very good. They're having Pro Bowl caliber seasons right now. And then against the Packers, maybe not the known names, but an effective strategy nonetheless that we've established. Matt LaFleur as a coach understands, knows how to game plan, knows how to attack this defense. So that blueprint is out there, and it's kind of like the right tackle spot. If it's on tape and teams know they can attack it, why would they not attack it? So I would expect the Dolphins to do a little bit of the same. Just, put your tackles out there. They're going to win those matchups because these guys aren't winning right now. They're not setting the edge. There's no threat of pass rush from the edge. And you can use all of your other resources to just plug up Jeffrey Simmons and T'Vondre Sweat. And then the whole defense caves in on itself. So that's what concerns me about this matchup. I think this is probably the worst offensive line they'll have faced this season. And I know Teron Armstead, Austin Jackson are 2 names at tackle, but I don't think they've been particularly up to snuff this season so far. I thought the Seahawks had pretty good games, pretty good moments against those guys, but the Titans don't have pass rushers that can capitalize on that matchup and make it mean anything. And that's what's frustrating about it, is that this has been a weakness. We've spotted this weakness for this team for a while now, and it's just it hasn't even been surprisingly pleasant at all. It's just been bad and even worse than we thought it was going to be, I dare say. And I don't know how you fix it unless guys just step up.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it may just be a frustrating week. Not to say any more of your, not to, say that your comments aren't valid there, but it may just end up being this pass rush. At least the edge rushers don't get anything done this week. And it really just ends up coming from a Jeffrey Simmons and T'Vondre Sweat bounce back game here for sure.
Yeah.
Because of the fact that their center, Aaron Brewer, former Titan, is at about a 70-pound disadvantage against T'Vondre Sweat.
They should eat him alive.
If Aaron Brewer, who has had a decent year this year, but what has really worked for him in this Miami offense is Aaron Brewer getting to the second level to continue to block for the running game. T'Vondre Sweat should be able to shut that down without any hesitation this week, I think. And if they are not able to do that, it's a big problem.
Yeah, for sure. And Matt LaFleur kind of recognized that and just ran away from T'Vondre Sweat because, again, there's nobody at the edge to slow the outside runs down. So it's going to be a situation where I think Sweat and Simmons both have to win those double teams. Somebody's got to break through and make whoever the quarterback is uncomfortable, because I think that's not only is it getting your defense to function the way it's built to function, but I think that's also how you create some turnovers in this matchup too.
Yeah, and Daniel here, who's back from this week after his wonderful comment last week that was just anger, says, if Brewer looks good Monday against them, I really may consider seppuku. So maybe we'll be hearing from Daniel with more than just anger. Lewis in the comments says he believes Snoop will be starting, but I think, it's not just on the Titans defense to win this game, as Kenneth brings up here in the comments. It's also on the offense. And as he says, the best defense is a good offense to me. It's time to score more than 17 freaking points. Tired of being a team where defense has to carry the team's water. And I think that's a very considering it is the 999th day since the Titans have scored 30 or more points. I love bringing that up because here's to 1,000 more, I think, as I said in the Titans media workroom, and everybody got very angry at me for saying that. And I said, I think it's a great day to celebrate, But the Titans offense, I think, needs to, and this goes back to what we were talking about earlier in the show, has to be accountable this week. And that starts with more consistency in the drives and how they're executing at least the start of their games and the start of their halves in terms of the plays that they do have scripted. And that's something that we asked Nick Holtz yesterday about, and could there be a little bit more sense of urgency in some of your game plan here and how you're executing those scripted plays. And so here's what he had to say on that matter.
Yeah, we kind of talk about that all the time. Like, I think the openers have been good for us. Chicago, they weren't great, but the last couple of weeks when we've kind of stayed on script and stayed on schedule, but it's more been about avoiding negative plays. And then you can kind of get to the more balanced stuff rather than totally the script of it. But I do think the scripted stuff helps. We've talked about you getting that balance of, do you want to save some things for the second half of a second half opener script and kind of do it. So we talk about all kind of those things, but really we think that just staying on schedule and not having any negative plays or getting behind the sticks on first and second down will really keep us efficient.
So with that comment, I think staying on schedule is the biggest thing for them, but also he talks about staying on schedule so that those negative plays don't happen. It's almost like, it feels like in that comment to me, Nick Holtz is saying, as long as Will Levis doesn't have a stupid turnover or a detrimental turnover, we can play the game we want. Because like we talked about on Tuesday's show, it really feels like as soon as Will Levis makes that boneheaded play, they get really conservative with their game plan to stop those plays. And that's where everything seems to get off the rails and get off the tracks in that game. And so if they are able to stay on schedule this game, and Will Levis isn't having those stupid boneheaded plays, I think you're going to see an offense where you see more than just one drive a half, that you have these design rollout boots for Levis, or you see these plays that they're scheming up here because they continue to have their 60 minutes of trust in Will Levis. And we'll see how long into this 60 minutes of game the trust lasts this week. Going back to the weeks prior, I would say that I would put the over under at like the 25th minute because of what's going on this week. But that's, I think, one of the biggest things, as Kenneth says, like if you're able to have trust in Will Levis and Will Levis is able to execute, I think you're going to score more than 17 points.
Yeah, I would agree with that wholeheartedly. And Nick Holtz and Brian Callahan, they can't get in these press conferences and throw their boy under the bus. Like that's still their guy. That's the guy that they have right now.
Right. But then also Nick Holtz did say yesterday as well, he said, we would like, Will is not a game manager, but we would like him to manage the game better.
Yeah,
so
that's as nice as you can put it. That's
Yes.
as nice as you can put it. And then we see Brian Callahan red in the face yelling at him on the sideline on Sundays. I think it is a clear confidence issue. And we've talked about it in the group chats, in the DMs, and all our buddies. It's like the air just comes out of this balloon the minute Will Levis does something stupid. And then it affects the game, the play calling, the game planning, all of that stuff. And I think you're right. I think that you can glean from that comment that there is a real trust issue, that they feel they have to really dial it back or else they're going to end up behind the sticks. I think I wonder how they feel about Nicholas Petit-Frere blowing a block and allowing a sack that's maybe not necessarily on Will Levis. Like there are multiple things contributing to this idea that they're just getting so far behind the sticks that it's third and long and you've got to dial up a chunk play to try to get that back. I think the key to really solving this issue, it does start with the quarterback, and it is just protect the football and don't turn it over. And let's see what some of these scripts look like, because when they work, they look pretty damn good.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you started a segue there perfectly. And how do you protect the protector of the football? It comes with the offensive line. And this is where we finally get into our Nicholas Petit-Frere discussion here. And it'll be a quick one because I think there's nothing more to be said than he needs to be better this week. And I think that starts with not only him playing better in practice, which Brian Callahan said earlier today that he's seen good things from Nicholas Petit-Frere this week. Whether that's just a load of coach speak or not is to be determined. I think it's the only way we're going to see it, get better is his play on the field. But I think we also have questions about what the Titans coaching staff can be doing more to help him as well. And I think that starts especially with maybe giving him some more chip block help on the right side. And that's something we asked Nick Holtz yesterday about. And so here is what he had to say about the right tackle situation.
The spacing in the passing game, right? So if you're leaving somebody in, you're leaving a back in, you're leaving a tight end in, that way you're really sacrificing whether it's a check down or holding a second or first level player to then throw it behind him or something like that. So that's really where the issue comes in, is you feel like, okay, you're playing with almost 6 linemen, it feels like at times when you chip all the time and you have to do those things. But also it's a necessary evil too, right? You can say, oh, we want to get everybody out, and then you're sacked. So there's balance, I think, for us. We don't want to chip and help every play, but we want to chip and help enough and give those guys a chance. And especially when you drop back, we got behind in that game, so it really became a drop back game for us, and that just kind of exposes your issues more.
Right. So I think it's he calls it a necessary evil, which I agree, but when you consider the necessary evil of giving Will Levis the check down route or simply giving him enough time to let the routes develop in the first place, I think it's something you have to start emphasizing more for this team. And so maybe MPF, this is a get right game for him, and something finally clicks for him. But over the first 3 weeks, it's not looked like that. And so I don't think we can rely on simply a get right game for him. And so I think they're going to have to chip more in this game to help Will Levis in the pocket.
Yeah, and I can see how this staff would look at that as evil because of how much they want to throw the ball out of 11 personnel. It's like I part of me wonders if they cringe at the term 12 personnel. I don't know. I feel like the benching of NPF a week ago had to have been more of a message to him, get it right, or we will not hesitate to pull you out of the game, because Jalen Duncan's just not ready to be the guy. And I
also not, sorry to interrupt, but it also sounds like he may just be the guy this week, because Jalen Duncan today pops up on the injury report with a shoulder. So
that's not good.
It may just be the MPF, unless maybe this is the John Ojukwu statement game. I don't know.
Flash it up there like the bat signal, baby. Ojukwu mania is back on. I don't know that either of the guys, if it is Duncan or if it is Ojukwu, is ready to step in and be serviceable at this point. Like, as bad as NPF has been, I think there were enough flashes in the Packers game, and I put a video together. It's on stackingtheinbox.com. I think there are flashes of good play from NPF, and I don't know that you necessarily get that out of one of the younger guys without constant tight end help. Like, at least sometimes you might be able to trust NPF in a pass protection situation. I think every time you snap the ball with Duncan or Ojukwu there, you're probably holding your breath, just closing your eyes and hoping for the best. So I think the strategy probably should be a little more tight end help, which, you know, you can use guys that can still catch passes. That's my whole thing about the 12 personnel throughout the summer was you have tight ends that are uniquely capable of doing different things in the passing game as well as the run game. So leverage them. I mean, hell, they're successful when they put Daniel Brunskill out there as a 6th offensive lineman. Like, let's see some more of that. They've put Jalen Duncan out there as a 6th offensive lineman this season so far. They've moved NPF over outside of JC Latham as a veritable tight end. They've gotten creative with their personnel usage, and it's worked. So lean into it. Do a little bit more of it would be my advice. I'm sure they're watching the Hot Read podcast thinking, what can we do to fix this team? What is Stoney and JT?
It seems like everyone's watching the Hot Read podcast, because the amount of talk about Titans and buckets just continues to grow and grow ever since we talked about buckets on our first episode. It seems like everyone just wants to talk about buckets. So I'm sure they definitely are listening to us. And I think that's a good place to transition to maybe some questions and then our best bets and get out of here. Daniel comes in with a question. He says, another question instead of just anger this show. PK recently spoke on the DNA of the franchise and that no matter who is paying, coaching, or signing players, the same scenarios keep playing out. Do you guys buy into that? And if so, wouldn't that mean there are some greater forces at work if such a thing could be baked into an organization? Anyway, quite the conundrum I've been thinking about. And I think that comes down to what he's trying to get at is more so ownership. I think it's too early to talk about that, because what we talked about earlier, it takes time for these things to click. And I think it's way too early to see if this new kind of style and new direction of the Tennessee Titans is going to work. And I think I wouldn't, for that question, not ruling it out as a possibility, but I think we're just too early into this new regime to see that.
I don't know. This might be a lot to get into, and we're already 10 minutes over the hour mark. Maybe I'll save this for a rainy day and just tell Daniel, I don't think your head's really in the wrong spot. I feel like I've had some of these questions before, and I think it's a valid concern, and I think it's worth at least being a little nervous. If this team doesn't start winning games, are we just going to blow it up, hit reset, and preach patience again? and I'll leave it at that.
All righty. And so Awaken also says this could be Will's last game in terms of a decision to be made on what quarterback they need to move forward with. If they just keep Levis in, the fix will have already been on the Titans' part. And I think that, I really still don't see a world where, unless you want to look at it like a Panthers perspective, where just for team morale, you want to get a win and you want to finally use that Mason Rudolph backup quarterback bump to get you over the hump and probably win a game or two. Like, there's no reason outside of that for me to see Will Levis not play, because at least if you are tanking or so by keeping Will Levis in and trying to make him work, you at least finally get your answer to the question. Maybe even though it may be just bonking your head on yourself on the head over and over and over again, but you know that he's not going to be the guy, and that sets you up to reevaluate in the offseason, I think.
I think you ride or die with Will Levis at this point. I think this is I don't know what this season is going to be. I don't know that Mason Rudolph is going to be the spark that people think he's going to be. Probably more of a stabilizing force, I'm sure, but I just feel like you have to, at the very least, you have to get to a point where you know what Levis is one way or the other. And if he bottoms out, you can have a high draft pick. You can pick a new quarterback next spring if you like. If he doesn't, great, you figured it out. I don't think they will be quick to pull the trigger on Will Levis and get Mason Rudolph in the game.
Yeah, and I think the last question here, Kenneth says, need to burn some Titans curse voodoo dolls at Mama Stoney's house. It looks like a good place to do it.
Yeah.
All right.
We can do that.
Let's move on quickly to our best bet gauntlet for week 4. And Stoney, I think we can move quickly because we talked about how, I don't know, maybe I was a Easton Freeze is bad at betting merchant on this show. Maybe it is, in fact, the storm cloud over your head that you say so that you brought to the show. But until we start winning, I think we should just give our picks and let the people either ride or die with us until we start getting hot, which is still going to happen because I think we both know that we're going to get right eventually. It's a long season, and I think we saw some progress last week at least, but I think we got to keep going. And so with my first pick this week on the best bet gauntlet for week 4, and like I said, it's a gauntlet. That's why it's a gauntlet. You got to run through it. You got to survive. And I think we get there eventually. But my first pick this week, and it's going to be a gross one, but Baltimore laying the 2.5 at home Sunday night against Buffalo. And for me, really, this is the height of the market here for the Buffalo Bills. I think you look at what they've done the past couple of weeks, playing a Arizona Cardinals team where they win in a shootout style fashion at home. They play against the Miami Dolphins, who have looked pretty lost since that first week. And then they play a Jacksonville Jaguars team, which I think is personally worse than the Titans right now. And so this is a team that I think this is the first time you're going to get a real challenge for Buffalo, and a team that is going to be ready for some of the things that Buffalo has been able to do against some of these other teams. And when you look at it, the trends also favor Baltimore in this game as well. 3-0 teams to come into week 4 as an underdog are only 37% against the spread all time. You also point to Lamar Jackson, who also continues to cover this trend as well. Jackson is a 23-7 against the spread as a favorite of 3 points or less, or as an underdog in all other spots. He's been 23-33 against the spread in his career. I like this game currently with Baltimore minus 2.5. I think this is a John Harbaugh spot where they get a statement win and start to get their season back on track. So give me the Baltimore Ravens in this first one.
Well, you mentioned the Jags being ass, and that's where I'm going with my first pick. I'm going to take the Texans by 6.5. This Jags team just they look bad. They've got some interesting names on their injury report this week too that are worth monitoring as well. They might be a couple guys down, or even if they play, they might be limited by injury. But this team just looks static right now, like they're not going anywhere. Trevor Lawrence looks completely shook. If I'm a Jags fan, I am panicking at the contract that they gave this guy, because he looks like he belongs in the class with Daniel Jones and Will Levis right now, not at all near the top 10 quarterbacks in this league. I think it's a sinking ship right now. Doug Peterson's play calling, I went back and watched their week 1 game against the Dolphins, watched the all 22, the tape, to prepare for the Dolphins scouting report that I wrote on Stacking the Inbox. And the play calling just kind of feels vanilla. It feels like behind the times football a little bit. And I think when you get into that situation with a shaky quarterback, a defense that's not playing well, an offensive line that can't block for shit, I think this Texans team comes in here and, like Joe Mixon, Tank Dell on the injury report, I don't think they need him. I think CJ Stroud is going to dice this defense apart, and it's going to be an ugly game if you're a Jags fan.
I do like the bounce back spot there for the Houston Texans after getting absolutely whooped and embarrassed last week. With my next pick, it's another classic case of fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. This is the shame on me week, catching the falling knife of the Cincinnati Bengals here. I'm taking them -4.5 against the Carolina Panthers. Listen, I think this is the bottom of the market for the Bengals. I think really when you look at it, if the Bengals were at least 1-2 in this game, I don't think there's any way that this game would be Cincinnati. It wouldn't be less than Cincinnati -6.5. So getting them at -4.5 right now really feels like the bottom of the market. And this is a good spot to catch the knife against an Andy Dalton team who got their backup quarterback bump. And then we've seen them kind of regress in a couple of these games as well in their second start. But the Bengals would be the 8th team in the last decade to be a road favorite in their 4th game of the year after starting 0-3. In those games in week 4, those teams are 8-0 straight up and 5-1-2 against the spread. Also in Burrow's career, he is 22-11 against the spread on the road or a neutral site. When he's closed as a field goal favorite or higher on the road, he is 7-3 against the spread in his career. I think this is the spot for the Bengals. Listen, this is a desperation game for them. You cannot, also for Zach Taylor. I really do think that if Zach Taylor loses to Andy Dalton this week, he may be fired after this week, and the Bengals may be looking for a new coach. And you probably see Lou Anarumo be their interim head coach there. But it's a desperation spot for the Bengals, and so I like them to finally get their first win of the season, kind of get everything back on track in this division, and get their first win of the season. So I'm taking the Bengals -4.5.
You mentioned in transition there the Texans getting whooped by the Vikings and that defense a week ago, and that's where I'm going with my next pick. Minnesota +2.5 at Green Bay. I think people are riding the wave of the 30 to whatever 14 victory over the Titans a little too high. I think the Flores factor here and that defense, what he did to the Houston Texans last week, what they've done prior to that, it's the best defense in football right now. Some of the things that he's doing are super creative. I don't see how this Packers offense battles it, and I think there are some injury questions along that formidable Packers front four. I know Devontae Wyatt's questionable. Kenny Clark's questionable. I think Sam Darnold can do enough to go to Green Bay to get this win, and you are really going to see, I don't know if you would call it the coming out party for like the casual football fan, but this is a big game this weekend. A lot of eyeballs are going to be on it, and I think people are going to start waking up to the job that Flores is doing with that Vikings defense. Give me the underdogs in this one.
Yeah, my next one here, this is one I grabbed earlier today. Cleveland +1.5. I'd play it all the way up to -1.5 after the news that Devontae Adams and Max Crosby are out here. Listen, I think this is just a defensive spot here. No matter, it's an ugly game, right? I think it's an ugly game. No matter, there may not be a touchdown scored in this game. It could end like 9-6. That's how bad both these teams have been playing right now. But the one part of this Cleveland team that I think is still very, very good is their defense. And listen, without Devontae Adams, you really only have to deal with Jacoby Myers and Brock Bowers, who has looked phenomenal, but it's easier to shut down Jacoby Myers and focus on Brock Bowers when you don't have Devontae Adams out there. And it's not like this Raiders team can really run on this Browns team, because the Raiders run game has been struggling all season. They only have 153 rushing yards through their first 3 games. It's the fewest amount since the Dolphins in 2019 had 135. It's the fewest in Raiders history. Their previous low was 185 last season. There's already some talk about Gardner Minshew getting benched for Aiden O'Connell. I think that's coming up pretty soon here. As I predicted, I think Aiden O'Connell should have been the starting quarterback from the start of the season. But that's here nor there, because I think Cleveland gets a decisive win here. Decisive and ugly win here in Las Vegas. And I'm taking them as underdogs. Right before that news came out, was able to grab them under there, but I'd play them all the way up to 1.5 point favorites this week.
Well, speaking of ugly games, JT, let's go to the Broncos at the New York Jets this weekend. That number is
Nathaniel Hackett revenge game. Finally,
Nathaniel Hackett revenge game. That number is sitting at 7.5 right now. And it kind of scares me. I'm going to stay away from that, and I'm going to bet the under here. The point total is currently set at 39.5. I think the Denver Broncos are going to come back down to earth a little bit. As much as I like Bo Nix, he's my fantasy quarterback, by the way, in my dynasty league. As shitty drafting as I've done, I've ended up with Bo Nix as my QB1, and actually the only quarterback that's playing on my roster right now. So I'm 2-1 with him. As much faith as I have in the guy, I don't like him against this defense on the road. I think this is a game that the Jets are going to control. They're gonna be in it the whole way. I wouldn't be surprised if the Broncos get the backdoor cover in garbage time. So that's why I'm staying away from the point spread. I'm taking the under. I think this is going to be like a 24-10 kind of game in favor of the Jets, but I'm not confident enough to pull the trigger on that point spread. Give me the under here.
Yeah, I like that pick there. And my next pick here, it's going to be a little bit of a 2-for-1 here, but I'm taking Atlanta -2 at home against the New Orleans Saints. And listen, this game, this game's going to come down to a field goal one way or other, but I'm expecting Atlanta to come out on top for a couple of reasons. One, dating back to last season, Derek Carr has covered his last 2 road games. Carr hasn't covered 3 straight road games since November of 2020. It's almost been 4 years, so I think that trend continues. But also, when he goes to Atlanta, he is 0-2 straight up and against the spread, playing on the road in Atlanta. I also think that we saw this Saints team start to come back down to earth last week when you saw the Philadelphia Eagles outgain the New Orleans Saints here 460-219. I think you're starting to see, even though the Falcons have some injuries on their offensive line, you're starting to see this team play a lot better than they did in their week 1 matchup against the Steelers. And outside of some, ticky-tack calls in that game against the Chiefs, they could have won that game. And I think we'd be seeing a line much higher than it is right now. And so this is a classic division matchup where one of these two teams is going to win by a field goal. I think it's going to be Atlanta because I think their defense is a lot more refined. I think they're going to be able to shut down Rashid Shaheed once again with their safety play. And so I'm going to take Atlanta to get the division win here, -2. But also a little bonus one here. I do like the over in this game when the total is closing between 0 and 44.5, which it is at 44.5. The record there in this game is 87-64-0. It's a 58% win rate there. So I do like, if you're going to go for a total there, maybe putting those two totals together, the Atlanta Falcons total and the Broncos Jets under. So yeah, that is my 4th pick, Atlanta -2. Stoney, your next pick.
So I don't know if this is a shadow take, if this has seen the light of day or not, if we've talked about it on the show, but I know you and I had a conversation back in the summer when we were trying to pick, like, who are some dark horse teams that you could see rising up, and maybe you don't want to say publicly because people would hurl their tomatoes at you, but you're just looking at them, you're like, this is gross, but I love these rosters. You and I both talked about 2 teams, the Arizona Cardinals and the Washington Commanders. They play each other this week. It's a game that I'm stoked to watch. I don't know if I might be the only person in Nashville that is like, yes, we got to find a TV for Cardinals Commanders, but these 2 teams do look like promising teams on the rise. That said, I'm taking the Cardinals by 3.5 here. I think they catch the Commanders on a short week after a huge win on Monday Night Football to get to 2-1. Think people are going to be riding that wave a little bit. Haven't watched the Cardinals a lot this season. It's going to look like easy money for the Commanders to stay within a field goal of this Cardinals team. But man, Kyler Murray's playing some really good football. Their defense is playing some pretty interesting football right now too. I think at home, I'm taking the Cardinals to cover this one, maybe even win pretty big, catching Washington in a tough spot after Monday Night Football.
Yeah, I like that pick there. My final pick here, hard to find one, but and this is a gross one because it most likely is going to be a shootout. But I'm going to take Geno Smith and the Seattle Seahawks plus 3.5 over that field goal. I wouldn't play it anything other than 3.5. I don't like getting it at 3 because this is a game that probably comes down to the wire and ends on a field goal anyways. But Geno Smith as an underdog, 22-17-2 against the spread as an underdog. So that is pretty favorable for him. But also, I think this is just a bet on that Mike McDonald defense and stopping the run. That has been something that the Lions have been able to ground and pound all season. And so I think with the Seattle defense, they've been really, really good at stopping the run. And this is a team that's going to try to get the Lions to kind of force it over the top, make Jared Goff make some mistakes, which I think he will have one or two in this game. And this game always ends with a shutout or with a shootout, I should say. The point total in this game has been 80 the last 2 or 3 times that they've played this matchup. And so I think there's going to be some absolute fireworks in this game. But I do like the Seattle Seahawks defense, even without maybe a few of their key pieces on the defensive line. They've been playing really, really good ball. Sam Laporta also banged up as well. And because of that, I'm going to take the Seattle Seahawks plus 3.5.
Well, I'm going to correct course with my last pick because last week I said stick with the gross teams. The gross teams win you bets, and I picked it. I pinned it on the wrong gross team. I went with the Buccaneers, and they got their asses kicked. So I'm going to pivot and go with another gross team that's been winning me money this season, and that's the Pittsburgh Steelers, 1.5 point favorites on the road at Indianapolis. I think the Colts suck. I think the Bears suck too. I think that week 1 game against the Titans looks a lot differently now that we're a month into the season. I don't think that's the quality performance that we thought it was. So give me the Steelers, that defense, Justin Fields playing the way that he's playing right now. I don't know why this number is the way that it is. I'm taking the Steelers.
Yeah, I like that pick there, especially with Kenny Moore and Kwity Paye being out for that Indianapolis Colts defense. It's like they have Laiatu Latu, and that's really it for the rest of the defense. So not great right there. So recapping our bets, Stoney, you have Steelers minus 1.5 at Indianapolis, Vikings plus 2.5 at Green Bay. I think that number is going up to 3, so maybe watch that one for the end of this week. Texans minus 6.5 versus Jacksonville. Cardinals minus 3.5 versus the Commanders, and the Broncos at Jets under 39.5. My bets this week: Baltimore minus 2.5 versus the Buffalo Bills. Cincinnati minus 4.5 at Carolina. Cleveland plus 1.5. Play it up to minus 1.5 at Las Vegas. Atlanta minus 2 hosting the Saints, and Seattle plus 3.5 against the Lions. That's going to do it for our show. Once again, running long, but hey, that's what happens when we get into talking Mike McDaniel's offense. You know,
at least I didn't go down my Alec Ingold rabbit hole. I could talk about him for another 15 minutes.
So we're gonna stop right there because I think people like their happy hour, but maybe not 15 minutes of Alec Ingold talk. But for myself and Stoney, we'll catch you guys after the Miami Dolphins and Tennessee Titans game on Monday. But until then, for Tuesday, this has been the Hot Read Podcast. We will see you later.